Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Police have launched an investigation following a murder of a mom and her daughter in Montreal. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has spoken out following the Trudeau government dropping controversial public safety minister Marco Mendicino from cabinet. And on the Korean War armistice, BCN's Micah Quinn chats with a highly decorated Korean War veteran here in Lethbridge.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Police in Montreal have launched an investigation following the murders of a 56-year-old woman and her 12-year-old daughter. Their bodies were discovered in a home early Thursday morning in the southwestern borough by officers responding to a call about a missing person. Police are still looking for that individual. Authorities say they have at least one suspect in custody, but are also searching for an important witness to the crime. The deaths mark the 17th and 18th homicides so far this year in Montreal. Road crews in Nova Scotia have repaired close to 500 sections of damaged paved and gravel roads from last weekend's record storm. The number of provincial road closures went from 60 and it's now down to 20. 19 bridges that needed minor repairs have reopened, but another 29 need more extensive work. Officials say 7 will also need replacing altogether. Crews have also repaired 60 road shoulders and replaced 62 culverts. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston was questioned why his government doesn't take more steps to stop residents from building near the coastlines where the potential for harm is greater once a storm strikes. One reporter asked if legislation should be introduced to prevent people from doing so.
I don't believe that that's the only mechanism to prevent people from doing it. There are municipal planning processes, there are municipal zoning processes. To suggest that legislation is the only way is just something I just don't agree with.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a stop in Summerford, Newfoundland to outline his government's policies aimed at offsetting the high cost of living. Trudeau says Canada is in better financial shape than many of the other G7 countries. He says what's helping is the child benefit, which his government introduced back in 2016.
That's lifted over 500,000 kids out of poverty across the country, put hundreds of dollars a month in the pockets of hardworking families for the cost of raising their kids. That's direct, tangible support that has made a real impact on people, and those are the kinds of investments in families that are at risk if the kind of austerity approach that the Conservatives continue to push end up landing.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre spoke more on the Trudeau government's cabinet shuffle. Poilievre was asked if he was happy that Marco Mendicino was dropped from cabinet as public safety minister. This was his response.
Yes, I am glad to see Marco Mendicino out. But, you know, he was just telling a lot of lies on behalf of Justin Trudeau. He lied about the use of the Emergencies Act, claiming police told him to do it. They did not. He lied when he said that Trudeau wasn't going to ban hunting rifles. Well, we then saw that there was a list of about 300 pages of hunting rifles Trudeau planned to ban. And in fact, Trudeau went on to admit that he was banning hunting rifles. He lied about his knowledge of the government's transfer of Paul Bernardo out of a maximum security penitentiary. And he lied about the fact that it was the Liberals' own law that had caused that unacceptable and traumatizing transfer of this monster. But I think he was telling those lies on behalf of Justin Trudeau. So it's all well and good to fire one incompetent minister, but it's Justin Trudeau who should have been fired.
Well, we had sun mixed with clouds today here in southwestern Alberta and right around the average high for this time of year, which is in the mid-20s. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, it appears as though more clouds may be rolling in with the potential of light showers developing.
Yeah, so get out and enjoy the sunshine while you can, because we could see that slight chance of moisture developing, and I do say slight because it is only a 30%. So if you are one of those ones that's looking forward to the rain, like our farmer friends, just be in mind it is only a 30% chance of showers this evening. We could see a risk of thunderstorms developing overnight as well. And then as we get into Friday, we're seeing sun and cloud in the morning, and then we could see that 30% chance by early afternoon, and by late afternoon it's going to clear on out again. So we're still going to see the sunshine by late Friday. Only 21 degrees too, which is much lower than we've been seeing lately and a little bit lower than the average high for this time of year. But you know what? After Friday, sunny days again are going to be upon us, and we're going to see some heat as well. And I will be back later in the show to tell you all about that 7-day forecast. Hal?
Thanks so much, Jeanette. A storm that covered much of Manitoba resulted in tornado warnings, rain, and very large hail. Meteorologists were tracking several storms that produced high winds and thunderstorms on Wednesday evening. Some residents in the Fisher River area took photographs of baseball-sized hail. They say the 10 to 15-minute storm damaged many homes. The number of active wildfires in British Columbia has now dipped below 450 as cooler weather and recent rain has cut the fire risk. Provincial Fire Information Officer Mike McCauley says the BC Wildfire Service is grateful for rain in BC's north, helping crews make progress and take advantage of a favorable weather window to battle the blazes. The service is reporting just 10 new fires in the last 24 hours amid the easing conditions. Meanwhile, here in Alberta, emergency officials say there are now 131 active wildfires burning in our province. There are still 8 fires which are out of control and 56 which are being held. Alberta Wildfire says close to 76% of the blazes were started by lightning. Around 15% were human-caused, and 9% are suspicious and are currently under investigation. So far this wildfire season, Alberta has experienced 917 wildfires. Fire advisories continue for many regions of the province, including Peace River, Banff National Park, Waterton Lakes National Park, the town of Claresholm, Tabor, and much of central Alberta, including Leduc County, Ponoka, and Rimbey. You know, when you think of major conflicts in history, the First and Second World Wars usually come to mind. Now, according to historians, one of the forgotten wars is the Korean War. Members of the Lethbridge Legion and local dignitaries held a wreath-laying ceremony on Thursday morning to honor the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice. BCN's Micah Quinn chatted with a decorated veteran of the war, who's known as the last surviving member here in Lethbridge.
I'm proud to have been able to serve my country and serve in Korea at that time.
Herbert L. Johnson served in the Korean War for 2 years, beginning in 1951. He explained to us the significance of his war medals with a little touch of humor.
It's a good bragging thing to say, you know, I was there, and if I ever got broke, the pawn shops are around. But in any case, no, truthfully, these first 2 medals are for the Korean War. Having service in Korea, I was only 18 when I went to Korea. I was supposed to be 9, but I fibbed a little bit, and nobody wanted to stop me, so I was on the boat and I was gone.
Glenn Miller, the president of the Alberta branch of the Last Post Fund, says Johnson is the last remaining Korean War veteran in Lethbridge.
He's the last one in uniform locally. I was in Airdrie a couple weeks ago when the monument was dedicated and unveiled to recognize the Battle of Capillon. I was in Brampton a couple years ago when that stone was done. And the significance of that day was that a lot of the branches from Southern Ontario folded after the ceremony because there's only 2 or 3 in each of the branches. So that sands of time in the period of history is closing, and it's our job today to pass the torch and appreciate and reflect on their sacrifice.
According to Veterans Affairs Canada, more than 26,000 Canadians served during the Korean War, and sadly, just over 500 laid down their lives in service of their country. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The rankings are out for the Crime Severity Index, and Lethbridge currently sits at number 3. We've seen a 16% decrease over the last couple of years. Now, back in 2021, Lethbridge was ranked number 1. Officials with the city and Lethbridge Police say the downward trend is encouraging news for our community. They say the decrease is something to celebrate.
We're doing a lot of stuff from the intel-led policing, different enforcement efforts to help drive crime down. But the number one reason that crime will go down, and I'm hoping it's going to continue that trend, is our citizens' engagement in reducing the opportunity crime for the criminals so they can't do it as freely. So as we work with our community, who are our number one partners in this battle to reduce crime.
Lots of work to do. absolutely a lot of work to do, but I'll share what the chief said, that Lethbridge is a safe community, and it's proven with the different stats. We'd heard a couple of weeks ago another report that was done that it's one of the safest communities in Canada. And again, is there more that we can do? Absolutely. We need to celebrate those wins. When we have something that comes in and states that we're the safest community in Canada, we need to be proud of that. And again, I'm just a broken record, but there's so much more we can do, but let's celebrate those wins for sure.
Lethbridge Police Chief Shahimi Dizadeh says most of the crime they're seeing right now are the crimes of opportunity. The Cell Phones for Safety campaign has been a big success here in Lethbridge. The event, which launched late last year to support survivors of abuse and violence, recently collected 106 cell phones. Tracy Rocca with Lethbridge Family Services says the refurbished phones can help their clients in a big way.
We started the campaign in November to coincide with Family Violence Awareness Month, and it was just to put it out there and see if we can get as many cell phones, tablets, charges to put in the hands of survivors and organizations who support these people. And we really just wanted to see where we could go with it. Today's donation is huge, and we're so excited. The phones are all refurbished, and they come with chargers and cords, and they're ready to go. Cell Phones from Safety comes from the Domestic Violence Action Team. We coordinated it, started it, and so all of the organizations that are members of that team, so it would be Lethbridge Police, YWCA, Probation, Alberta Health Services. We have school boards involved. Lethbridge University, Lethbridge College, our Elder Abuse Network, Victim Services. We're hoping that we can share the phones. In the past, we have shared the phones with places that are in need, Coaldale, Tabor, reaching out to Pincher Creek to see who all needs the phones and that the organizations get them.
Rocca says the 106 cell phones were donated by one generous community partner who wanted to remain anonymous. Applications are now open for deserving farm families to receive some much-needed recognition at next year's Calgary Stampede. The Farm Family Award is presented to agriculture families from across the province each and every year. Officials with Lethbridge County Agriculture Service Board explained why this initiative is so important.
Agriculture is the backbone of our economy in Lethbridge County, and it's incredibly important that we recognize those farming families who contribute so much to the strength and stability of our region. Farmers are hardworking, resilient, adaptable, and display a strong commitment to our communities.
The nomination deadline is August the 27th, and you can check out the Lethbridge County website for more information. A new study is being put together to look into how the St. Mary and Milk Rivers can better support our agricultural communities and what improvements need to be made in order to do so. It'll be presented to the International Joint Commission in June of 2025. Al Pietriniero is a professor of engineering at the University of Calgary. He says there was a time when Canadians didn't want any part of sharing water with their American neighbors.
So around 1909, as this canal system was being built, it's about 26 miles of canal. The Canadian farmers on the Canadian side of the border weren't too happy that water was being taken out of the Saskatchewan Basin, and so they started building what they called the Spite Ditch. And the Spite Ditch is actually near the town of Milk River, and it was a ditch that was going to take the water in the Milk River as it was coming back into Canada and put it back into the Saskatchewan system. And so that caused a dispute between both countries. And so then it was decided that, cooler heads should prevail here, right? And we should share the waters. And so that's when the treaty started.
Make sure you catch the entire interview with Al Pietriniero, a professor of the Schulich School of Engineering at the University of Calgary, and myself coming up after Business News. Well, it is almost time to stuff the bus. The annual campaign is back, which aims at collecting backpacks filled with new school supplies to help Lethbridge families who are in need of back-to-school items. Now, last year, the initiative gave out over 1,400 backpacks at the event. Staff with My City Care in Lethbridge say they're hoping to beat those numbers this year.
This year, we're thinking that number is going to be a lot higher, so we're preparing for 2,000 backpacks this year, which is crazy. But yeah, we need help just collecting school supplies. We're looking for just the main essential back-to-school supplies: paper, pens, pencils, binders. We're pretty good on backpacks, but everything else is still in high need. I just think if people are looking to register, they can find us on our Facebook page or our Instagram to register, and we are still looking for volunteers too, so they can connect with us at the office.
Now, if you're wanting to get involved with Stuff the Bus initiative, there'll be events around the city taking place from August 22nd through the 24th. August 1st is Emancipation Day. It marks the abolishment of slavery across the British Empire back in 1834. Now, in 2021, the House of Commons voted unanimously to designate August 1st as Emancipation Day. Ngozi Paul is a Toronto-based actress who's starring in a film about the history of slavery here in North America. She says even though the day is recognized, more needs to be done.
Actually, a motion was passed on March 24th, 2021. It actually hasn't been enshrined into law as of yet. A bill still hasn't passed nationally. It's recognized in a few provinces by law, but not nationally. And I think that has to do with a misunderstanding about Canadian history. And there's just a necessity for us to have more awareness. It's one of the things that seems so obvious. Certainly, I didn't hear about Emancipation Day until 2017. It seems so obvious, but it takes that awareness to move into action.
Make sure you catch the full interview with actor and director of Free Up, Emancipation Day, and Ngozi Paul and BCN's Angela Stewart coming up later in our broadcast. A girl from Arizona whose disappearance close to 4 years ago is sparking a massive search that included the FBI, walked into a police station in Montana this week. 18-year-old Alicia Navarro of Glendale showed up in a small town around 60 kilometers from the Canadian border. Police say she is healthy and happy and told them she had not been harmed. When she disappeared from her home, police say she left a signed note saying she ran away. Police south of Manila say at least 21 people died and 40 others were rescued after a Philippine passenger boat overturned in high winds on Laguna Lake. Rescue operations are continuing. The Coast Guard says the boat capsized when passengers moved to one side in a panic as it was battered by fierce winds caused by a typhoon. China has allegedly pledged to change the face of Christianity at a conference for pastors of state-controlled churches. According to Andrew Boyd from the Global News Alliance, the aim is to export a communist Christian hybrid around the world.
China's been trying to compel churches to adopt the atheist ideology of the Communist Party, which denies the existence of God. UK-based Release International warns atheism and Christianity can never mix and says China's policy is a smokescreen to mask increasing persecution. A conference for state-appointed pastors of the government-controlled Free Self Church was broadcast throughout the nation. Its rallying cry to change the face of world Christianity was greeted with thunderous applause. So what does this atheist take on Christianity look like in China itself? Tightening state control has led to the tearing down of more than 1,000 crosses from official churches and imprisoning pastors, along with Chinese lawyers who try to defend their legal right to display the cross of Christ on their churches. The Communist parties insisted that pictures of Mao and President Xi Jinping are displayed in churches and lately demanded that a hammer and sickle be put up alongside a church sign in Zhejiang province. Pastors who take up offerings have been arrested for fraud or illegal business operations. China watchers Bitter Winter point out that thousands of Christians each year vote with their feet to leave the state-controlled church and join illegal house churches, where they face surveillance and imprisonment for exercising their freedom of faith. Bob Fu is president of Release International partner China Aid. He said despite the persecution, the church in China is growing.
Purdue University estimates the number of Christians in China today has already, at minimum, they said, reached to over 100 million. Some actually said as many as 130 million. That's almost 10% of China's population.
In choosing to pair atheist communism with Christianity, China should heed the lesson of nature, that when you combine different species, their offspring are nearly always sterile. Release International warns China's atheist version of Christianity will be a dead end. This is Andrew Boyd for the Global News Alliance.
130 million Christians in China. Wow. Well, it was another hot and dry day here in Lethbridge, and there's a slight chance of some light shower activity developing. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. You know, if you like it sunny and hot, you must be loving summer so far here in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is now with a complete look at the forecast. Jeanette, for many of our farmers, however, they've been praying for more rain. Will those prayers be answered fairly soon?
Yeah, you know, Hal, I do have to say they could be, and that's all about I can say. We are looking at a slight chance, so 30% chance this evening with an overnight chance of some thunderstorms there. Overnight low, 11 degrees as well. As we get into Friday, as I said before, we're looking at mix of sun and cloud and then some increasing clouds by the afternoon. Could see that 30% chance of rain, and then it's going to dry up again, bringing us sunshine late on Friday, but high of only 21, which is way lower than the average high for this time of year of 26. As we get into the weekend and beyond, we're seeing those high temperatures again and lots of sunshine and dry conditions. 27 Saturday, high of 30 degrees this Sunday, 28 on Monday, 29 on Tuesday, and then back up to 30 degrees on Wednesday. So if you love the heat, it's a great time of year. If you're praying for the moisture, not so great. That's about what I can say there. So average high for this time of year, 26. Average low, 11. 37 was our high temperature on this day that happened back in 1939, and in 1997 was the chilliest, which was 5 degrees. 5:55. That is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening, 9:20. We are just under 15 and a half hours of daylight. As we get to the west coast tomorrow, we're seeing mainly sunny conditions. Victoria looking at a high of 20 degrees, 50 wind in the Juan de Fuca Strait, 23 in Vancouver. Much warmer inland though, lots of sunshine there. Edmonton looking at a high of only 18. So both Edmonton and Calgary, high temperatures only in the teens tomorrow. Edmonton looking at a 40% chance of showers, and Calgary a 60%. Both of those cities seeing a risk of thunderstorms tomorrow as well. As we get to the rest of the prairies here in Saskatoon, high of 19. So still seeing those teen temperatures only, but a mix of sun and cloud. Regina seeing a chance of showers mixed with some thunderstorms there. 21 for a high and a high of 21 in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud there. Now there is a heat warning still in effect in Toronto. Hot and humid conditions will continue into Friday. Looking at a humidex tomorrow of 39, high of 30 degrees though, and also a 40% chance of showers there with a risk of a thunderstorm. Ottawa seeing a greater chance of rain, 70% there with a risk of thunderstorm, 28 for a high, 27 for a high in Montreal. Montreal also seeing a chance of showers and some thunderstorms as we get to the east coast. 29 in Fredericton, going to be a warm one. Lots of sunshine as well. Halifax could see a few showers there, 27 for a high. Same thing in Charlottetown, high of 27. Looking at some showers as well. Cooler conditions though along the coast, both in Nova Scotia and PEI, as well as St. John's looking at a high of 23 degrees. Could see a mix of drizzle and showers, mostly in the morning, drying up by the afternoon. And there you have it. That is your forecast.
Teck Resources announced the death of an employee at a copper mine expansion in Chile. Officials say lessons from the investigation into the employee's death are being shared across the company to prevent future incidents. Teck reported a profit of $510 million in its second quarter. Now that's down from $1.7 billion for the same period last year. Teck also lowered its annual production guidance for the copper mine project to 80,000 tons from 100,000 due to delays in construction and commissioning. Cenovus Energy is lowering its upstream production guidance for the year. It reported a second quarter profit of $866 million. That is down from $2.4 billion in the same quarter last year. Revenue for the quarter dropped from $19.2 to $12.2 billion. The company says it experienced production impacts due to Alberta wildfire activity and planned maintenance. Cenovus says it now expects upstream production for this year to be between 775,000 and 795,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. That is down slightly from its last quarter outlook. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 176 points on the day to finish at 20,385. The Dow was down 237 points to 35,282. The S&P 500 was down 29 on the day to 4537, and the Nasdaq was down 77 points to 14,050. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.03 to $79.81 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 17 cents to $2.49 US. Gold was down 7 cents to $19.45.94 US an ounce, and silver was also down but 80 cents to $24.14 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.43 per bushel, barley's at $9.12, canola's at $18.54, and corn is at $10.31 per bushel. Live cattle were down 63 cents to $178.05. Feeder cattle were up 45 cents to $244.65, and lean hogs were up 38 cents to $102.03. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 75.62 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta emergency officials say there are now 131 active wildfires burning in our province. There are 8 fires which are still out of control and 56 which are being held. Alberta wildfires says close to 76% were started by lightning, around 15% were human-caused, and 9% are suspicious and are currently under investigation. So far this wildfire season, Alberta has experienced 917 wildfires. A special agreement was signed between Canada and the United States when it comes to sharing our water. Water provided by the St. Mary River and Milk River watersheds. A professor from the University of Calgary will share details with us momentarily. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Everyone in Lethbridge is invited to come out and celebrate their cultural heritage on Heritage Day, Monday, August 7th at Galt Gardens. The fun begins at 11 a.m. and goes to 4 p.m. with fabulous food vendors, live entertainment, activities for the kids, and so much more. The event is free, so bring your family, friends, and neighbors to Heritage Day at Galt Gardens and make great summer memories. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help make sandwiches, sort incoming donations, assist with Foot Friday, and many other opportunities to serve, receive training, and to provide support for this important cause of bringing hope to the hopeless. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
For over a century, Canada and the United States have shared the waters of the St. Mary and Milk Rivers through negotiated agreements. The International St. Mary and Milk Rivers Study is a 4-year effort to determine if improvements can be made. The study will present its report to the International Joint Commission in June of 2025. Now, to chat about the study in more detail and how it will impact residents on both sides of the border is Al Pietranero. He's a professor at the Schulich School of Engineering at the University of Calgary. Al, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thanks for having me, Al. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn about the study.
Oh, you bet, Al. Now, first of all, what is the focus and objective of this Milk River study?
So a lot of folks aren't really familiar with the actual basin itself, right? So for over 100 years now, there's been a diversion of water from the St. Mary system, and the St. Mary flows into the Saskatchewan River, right? And the Milk River actually starts in the US, comes up into Canada, goes back into the US, and the Milk River actually flows into the Missouri system, so it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. And so in about 1909, a diversion was built to take a higher yielding river, which is the St. Mary River, and move some water into the Milk River to allow for irrigation downstream on the US. And so there was a treaty established. It was actually the first treaty ever established between the US and Canada on water to make sure that there was basically a fair sharing of water between both countries. And so there's rules and regulations about how much water can be diverted, how we account for that water. And over the years, what we've noticed in trying to manage the system is that both countries have not maximized the beneficial use of those waters because of timing and climate issues and just changes in the basin. And so the officers in charge of that treaty decided that it was maybe a good idea to have a study to see what has changed in the basin and if we can make better use of the water on both sides of the border.
Let's talk about the connection now between St. Mary and Milk Rivers and why the St. Mary Canal is so important for water supply during the hot and dry summer months.
So if you know the area at all, you'll know that the St. Mary River actually starts in the headwaters of the Saskatchewan Basin, around Glacier National Park on the US side, right? And so it's a high yielding basin. It has a lot of water, high mountains, lots of snowpack, right? If you look at the Milk River, it's kind of a foothills type of river. And so it's quite a bit drier. and doesn't yield nearly as much water, right? So it's more rainfall dependent than snow dependent, right? And so the volumes of water that go through that system are a lot less. And so if you're irrigating in Montana on the Milk River, sort of downstream of the Canadian border, there's just not enough water to supply to support that irrigation, right? And so that's why the structures were built.
So when did the original water sharing agreement between Canada and the U.S. for the St. Mary and Milk Rivers originate?
So it's an interesting story because it started in around 1909. I think around sort of the 1890s, 1900s, engineers in the U.S. were looking at that particular diversion. It's a really interesting diversion in the sense that it's all gravity fed. So there's no pumps. It's all gravity that takes the water from one watershed to another, which is pretty unique. But so around 1909, as this canal system was being built, it's about 26 miles of canal. The Canadian farmers on the Canadian side of the border weren't too happy that water was being taken out of the Saskatchewan basin. And so they started building what they called the Spite Ditch. And the Spite Ditch is actually near the town of Milk River. And it was a ditch that was going to take the water in the Milk River as it was coming back into Canada and put it back into the Saskatchewan system. And so that caused a dispute between both countries. And so then it was decided that, cooler heads should prevail here, right? And we should share the waters. And so that's when the treaty started. So 1909 was the beginning of the treaty. And in 1921 was when the orders were set out. So how much Canada gets versus how much the US gets, and sort of how the whole basin was going to be treated.
So Al, how has this agreement impacted the water access for both nations?
So, I think in general, it's been beneficial. Back in those days was really focused on irrigation and expansion of the West, as you well know. And so what it allowed for was actually expansion and irrigation on the U.S. side of the border, because there's water that gets stored in the Fresno Reservoir that comes through the system. But it also allowed for water supply on the Canadian side of the border as well, right, for the Milk River irrigators. So I think both countries benefited from the use. And oftentimes, if you look at the Milk River, let's say in July, probably 80-90% of the water flowing through the Milk River is actually U.S. water.
So Al, what factors in the watershed have really changed over time?
So a couple of things to think about in the basin itself. So one is, it's Glacier National Park on the U.S. side of the border, right? And so the glaciers have receded. And so, we've seen that impact in the water supply for sure. But we've also noted over the years that the weather patterns have changed, right? This year's, it's been particularly dry in some parts of the country, as you know, right, in some parts of the U.S. The June rains that we typically saw and expected don't happen as often and as kind of regularly as they used to happen, right? And so the actual climate of the system has changed a fair bit, right? And so that's a big part of why we're looking at this study. The other thing is the infrastructure has changed a little bit too, right? So the conveyance capacity of the canal isn't what it used to be, right? Things tend to erode over time, right? And so there's a lot of infrastructure that's kind of being looked at now, and so we're hoping that over time, the conveyance capacity, so how much water the system can actually push through, will increase over time to its kind of original design levels, and so we want to look at the impact of all those things. The last thing I'll say is, the way the treaty is organized is we actually allow for certain things to happen with respect to water sharing between both countries. And those are elements that, perhaps we should revisit, right? So we're looking at that as well. So we don't change the treaty per se. We just look at how we implement the treaty a little differently. And so we're looking at aspects there as well.
How much of a voice do Indigenous groups have in regards to this study and in regards to the water supply from both rivers?
Yeah, so part of the study, an important part of the study is, and actually initiated through the IJC, has been to have an Indigenous advisory group as part of this effort, right? And so we are listening to Indigenous voices on both sides of the border. And so we've had regular conversations with them. They're actually sitting on some of the science committees as well. So some of the work we're doing, the technical work we're doing, we've asked some of the Indigenous water managers to help us, understand the system. And so we really want to bring in an Indigenous perspective to the study as well, right? That's important. Times have changed and we need to keep up with that.
Let's talk about some of the other specialist groups as well involved in this study of St. Mary and Milk Rivers.
So the way those studies set up is and these studies are actually have been run across the country, right? There was a Souris River study done a few years back. There was one on the Great Lakes. There was one on the Richelieu River in Quebec as well, Lake Champlain. And they're all sort of set up to have a strong technical element. So we have a technical working group that's been developed. We look at different options, right? So we're looking at both structural and non-structural options to see, how we can improve the entitlements of water on both sides of the border. And so the technical working groups are typically made of people who actually work in the basin, right? So whether it's Alberta environment and protected areas, people that work on managing water in Alberta, or whether it's the Montana authorities or the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, we bring all those experts together to set up an expert panel on all kinds of aspects, right? Socioeconomic, technical, structural, non-structural, other things. But next to that, we actually have a couple of advisory groups. I mentioned the Indigenous Advisory Group, but we also have a public advisory group. So we seek input from the public. We've had a number of town halls. We had one in Milk River. We had one in Havre. We're going to keep doing that over the course of the study. And we want public input to make sure that whatever we recommend to governments at the end of the day, right, the public has a buy-in into how we're doing that, right? So there's a public advisory group as well. And then to make sure that the science we're doing and the engineering we're doing is state of the art, we have an independent review group that reviews everything we do on the technical side. And lastly, this is all managed by a study board, right? And so I'm the Canadian co-chair, there's a US co-chair, and then we have 3 members for each country that make sure that everything's happening.
Let's talk a bit about the water table level, because I've noticed with a lot of reservoirs in the province here, they're drying up with the drought that we've had, a lot of the hot and dry weather. Is that weather also impacting some of the rivers?
Yeah, for sure, right? So we had a really early runoff this year, as you well know, right? And so waters have peaked. The Milk River is interesting right now because actually the Fresno Reservoir is actually doing quite well. There was a lot of rain in that specific part of the U.S., right? And these are why these things are difficult, right? So the Fresno Reservoir is actually reasonably full right now. And so I think, the basin's actually doing reasonably well this year because of that. Although it's really quite dry on the Canadian side of the border, right? And so the thing about this basin is there's not a lot of infrastructure. There's the diversion infrastructure, right? But there's not a lot of storage. And so, that's something we're going to look into with the study. But yeah, the only main storages really are on the U.S. side of the border, and they're managed by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation on the Milk River. Of course, the St. Mary system is quite different, right? Once you get up towards Lethbridge, then you have the St. Mary Reservoir, which is a big storage facility, right, for irrigation for Alberta. But that's really kind of outside the limits of the study.
That's also drying up, I got to tell you.
Yes.
It is drying up right now. We've had quite a bit of dry and hot weather here. Al, let's talk specifically about the advisory groups participating in the study, and what role do they play in providing input and feedback on the work of the technical working groups?
So part of what we're trying to do or what we will do is really develop what we call indicators, right? And so we want to look at socioeconomic indicators. So look at if when water is available, people make the best use of it, right? How that's going to work. And so we need to talk to local farmers and irrigators to make sure that we're understanding, their perspectives in terms of the water allocations, right? And that's on both sides of the border, right? But there's also other groups, there's recreational users as well, right? Like I said earlier, there's the Indigenous groups as well, right? And so we want to make sure that all those perspectives are there. There's towns along the border, right? And that we have to respect that they have water supply and all those things. So really it's to get all that input to make sure that we understand what's important to the individuals who live in the basin, right? So that we can reflect that in looking at the various options we're gonna table. And make sure that we minimize the impacts to people, or we increase the net benefit to folks as well, right? And so that's really why we need the public input, right? They're the ones that are affected by this, and so they need to have a major say.
Are there any findings from this study specifically that surprised you?
Well, we're just getting started in a sense that the technical work's going on right now. I think we kind of know what to expect because we've been dealing with this basin a long time, right? And so we kind of know what to expect. But we'll see down the road when we make the recommendations if there's anything that is surprising to us, right? There always are issues that sort of crop up that perhaps we hadn't thought of, right? And so that's why it's really important to get the public and Indigenous engagement there. And so we'll see what materializes. We're open to all the discussions that are coming down the road here, and we want to do the best for the citizens in the region, right? So right now we think we kind of know where things are going to land, right? But we don't want to bias any decisions here, right? We want to be open to all considerations.
So bottom line, how will this study really benefit Albertans and other Canadians?
Well, I think in the Milk River Basin and on the St. Mary systems, right, it'll allow to ensure that the entitlements that Canada receives, right, are sort of for the most beneficial use, right? And so right now, in some years, right, Canada doesn't necessarily, especially on the milk system, isn't able to use all of its entitlements, right? Because the thing about water is sometimes it often comes at the wrong time of the year. And so how do you deal with that, right? So you need water to irrigate, let's say in July and August, right? Most of the water comes in May and June. How should we fix that, right? And that's kind of where we're focused on. So in the end, I think it'll be a benefit to both the US and Canada.
So if viewers want to know more about this study, Al, where can they go?
So if they just do a Google on St. Mary Milk Study, it'll lead them to the IJC site and they can go straight there and all the information is there, including the recent released sort of science plan that we have. And so people are encouraged to look at that and get back to us if they have any questions. There's an email that they can send emails to, and we'll do our best to answer any questions.
Al Pietranero is a professor at the Schulich School of Engineering at the University of Calgary. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for your interest. Take care.
Well, Emancipation Day is a celebration of freedom, and in 2021, Canada officially designated August 1st as Emancipation Day, which marks the actual day in 1834 that the Slavery Abolition Act came into effect, ending almost 400 years of slavery in the British Empire. Ngozi Paul is a Canadian actress, award-winning director and producer, also founder of Free Up. She's best known as the creator, executive producer, and actress of Global TV's comedic drama Da Kink in My Hair. Her documentary titled Free Up, Emancipation Day airs on August 1st on CBC, and she joins us now to talk about Emancipation Day and her documentary. Ngozi, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hi, happy to be here.
First off, can you give us a little history on Emancipation Day in Canada and how that all kind of came to be? Many people see it as the Canadian equivalent to Juneteenth, which is recognized in the U.S.
I think that is really interesting in terms of how history gets to us, because we often think of Juneteenth as, when slavery was abolished, or at least when the enslaved peoples found out about when slavery was abolished. But Emancipation Day recognizes the abolishment of enslaved peoples throughout the British Empire. And actually, we all know that the United States used to be part of the British Empire. That's probably part of the fighting. But it recognizes the abolishment of enslaved people throughout the British Empire. And whereas Juneteenth is when enslaved peoples found out about the abolishment of slavery in the United States. And I don't know what it was called then. But funny, it went on in Canada for several hundred years.
And many Canadians learned about Canada's role in fighting against African-American slavery and the Underground Railroad, which brought over 30,000 African-Americans to Canada to escape slavery. But Canadians are not always aware that Black and Indigenous peoples were once enslaved on the land that is now Canada. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was one of those people who just didn't know about the Canadian history of enslavement. But essentially, from when it was abolished across the British Empire and to when it was abolished in the United States is, just over 35 years, 36 years. And so that's actually when it made sense for people to flee from the United States South into Canada. But there were literally hundreds of years. And I think that that's one of the legacies of colonization is that, in truth, it was, our country was built on free labor.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the Slavery Abolition Act, which came into effect close to 200 years ago on August 1st. Now, why did it take so long for Emancipation Day to become officially designated in the House of Commons?
Well, a motion was passed on March 24th, 2021. It actually hasn't been enshrined into law as of yet. A bill still hasn't passed nationally. It's recognized in a few provinces by law, but not nationally. And I think that has to do with a misunderstanding about Canadian history. And there's just a necessity for us to have more awareness. It's one of the things that seems so obvious. Certainly, I didn't hear about Emancipation Day until 2017. It seems so obvious, but it takes that awareness to move into action.
For most enslaved people in British North America, the act resulted in only partial liberation because it only freed children under the age of 6. But it did lay a pathway to freeing over 800,000 enslaved Africans and their descendants in parts of the Caribbean, Africa, South America, as well as Canada. Can you talk a little bit about the path and the journey we took to become the freedom-loving Canada that we are today?
I'm just like, I think we're still very much on that path. And again, because we're talking about the British Empire, there were different countries that had different histories with Emancipation Day. In Canada at the time, there were parts of Canada where slavery had already been abolished. And so I think that the path is actually very nuanced. There are some people who might suggest that even though there was the abolishment of slavery throughout the empire, there were many different countries and communities who still didn't actually receive their freedom, or it was just called something different. So it's for me, it's still a journey of uncovering and learning and also defining what it means today.
Now, you've said that celebrating Emancipation Day is about the future, not the past. I'm wondering if you could kind of explain this a little bit further.
Well, I think it's about both. I definitely think it's about both. I believe that celebrating Emancipation Day is definitely an opportunity to understand, to educate, to reflect, to appreciate, to recognize our past and learn about it. And it is also an opportunity for us to decide, what does it mean today and what do we want it to mean for future generations? As we are able to look back at abolitionists and people who worked to change those laws, to affect change in their communities, to resist, what do we want to do in 2023 moving into the future? So I really do feel that it is both an opportunity to reflect on the past, to understand the past, and to design and create and imagine our future.
Now, your 1-hour program, Freed Up Emancipation Day, is about asking artists what freedom means to them. Now, to you, what does it mean to be free?
That continues to change. I have a 2-year-old son. So just a little bit of me time is freedom. But it's a question that I ask, and I think it's a question that I ask so much because not only does it continue to evolve, but it is something that I think about so much when I think about my ancestors and the work and the sacrifice and that was made for their survival. For me to be here and exist and have space and to take time and reflect and answer, think to myself and have questions. I think freedom for me is about cultivating a sense of peace and a sense of joy and space and a sense of expansion in terms of all of the work and energy that has brought us to this point, and what am I going to do with this present moment for future generations.
And your program also features some notable Black Canadian artists. Can you give us some highlights of who are in the special?
Oh, wow. We have a lot of wonderful artists in this special and in past specials. So this year we have the Adinkra Drummer Ensemble. We have Kaya Cater performing, Deja SB, James Bailey, Rosemary Sadler is in the special, Natasha Henry, who wrote the book on Emancipation Day, as well as Wayne Mengesha, who is our Freedom Award winner this year. Olunike, it really is a cacophony, a chorus of beautiful voices reflecting on Emancipation Day and advocacy.
And you kind of touched on it a little bit there. Your special pays homage to Rosemary Sadler. Tell us about her efforts and her contributions.
Well, I would never have heard of Emancipation Day if it wasn't for her. So Rosemary Sadler has been pivotal as a community leader and in having us have Emancipation Day recognized, but not only Emancipation Day, but also Black History Month. As an educator, she really saw a need for Black history and Black Canadian history, which is Canadian history, to be recognized. And she has been an advocate. She wrote letters, gave speeches, made phone calls. We like to joke like this was before you could just get it done by, clicking a few buttons. Actually had to send letters in the mail or faxes. Remember those? But she really has worked tirelessly volunteering. She was the head of the Ontario Black History Society for many years as well. And I mean, when I say decades, she worked as an advocate. And so the Rosemary Sadler Award is about artists who are advocates and who are using their crafts and their skills to change their community, to empower voices and to create platforms. And she is the embodiment of that, a hero of mine.
Now, another vital contributor is Natasha Henry. I'm wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about her research and her writings, which played a role in educating Canadians about Emancipation Day.
Well, when I learned about Emancipation Day, actually, one of the books that I got when I started working on this was her book, Emancipation Day in Canada, Celebrating Freedom in Canada. And she literally wrote the book on Emancipation Day in Canada. She is an assistant professor at York University. And I asked her why she chose that. And for her, being from having a Jamaican lineage, Emancipation Day is really celebrated more in Jamaica and other countries around the world. And so she was surprised to find out about the long history of Emancipation Day in Canada, and being a historian and an educator, she took up that mantle to put it down in literature. Very, very necessary tools.
And kind of lastly here, you probably heard of some amazing stories while filming this production. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like? Specifically when you were in St. Catharines, Ontario, you had a chance to speak at the church that Harriet Tubman attended.
So I, in creating Free Up, and this is going to be our 4th year where we've been airing the annual special with the CBC. For me, it really has been a journey of discovery, and being one of the years we actually hosted from Harriet Tubman's church, and so being in that space and just knowing Harriet Tubman is, when I think that she kept going back and forth, it just blows my mind. And we really, the more I learn about Emancipation Day, the more I uncover our own Canadian history and how many heroes in our generation and in past generations there really have been. We interviewed one woman this year who she preserves cemeteries, and she transformed a cemetery that had become a landfill. It had become a landfill, and through donations, through volunteering, they cleared it out and made it a beautiful space. And it's one of the first interracial cemeteries in the country. And I feel like, that's a history that we don't want to lose. So I've had so many deeply touching moments, and this journey has really been a gift.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is all the time that we have for today in Ngozi. We really appreciate you having on our show to learn more about Emancipation Day and your 1-hour feature.
Okay, thank you so much.
That was Ngozi Paul, creator of Free Up Emancipation Day. From all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart. Thanks for watching.